If what you're doing, in your own life, if everyone was doing that, would that be okay for the world or not?
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. In the beautiful Orcas Island in the San Juan Islands of Washington State, you'll walk into this interesting shop called Smith and Speed Mercantile, and that's where we are right now. I'm here with my guests, Kathleen Smith, Errol Speed. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And you do have a wondrous shop, Mercantile, for tools for homesteads and supplies for homesteads. Mm-hmm. How did you come to create this?
Well, it's an extension of our lifestyle. We live off the grid, and we do everything by hand or by horse. So Errol has 2 draft horses. I have 9 goats. They help us clear the land. Errol's horses help us, move things on our land. Errol does everything by hand, building, garden.
So you're
everything.
we're looking at hand tools for everything, and animal powered.
Right.
Whoa! That's both thrilling to think about, and I bet a whole lot more work.
Absolutely.
Because you're not dealing with electricity for your drilling and your whatever.
Correct.
That's right. And one of the things that over the years that I've experienced, since I have in the past used power tools, is that I've seen that the evolution of hand tools is that the hand tools are less and less effective that you buy in the regular hardware stores, because they're really not meant to do the job easily, because there are power tools now that do all those jobs. So we try to buy and stock the kind of tools that were used long ago that were very effective, because it was the only tool to do the job.
That's
so
right.
It made it much easier.
And so what Errol does is he field tests everything.
Is that
that's what he tells me. Kathleen, I need to take this home and field test it. I'm like, really?
Now we know why you have the Mercantile house, so you can try all the new toys.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, but it really is true that you can't really convincingly sell a person a tool unless you have used it and experienced its ease, its effectiveness. So there are a lot of tools on the market that just don't work, and we kind of cull those out, and we carry the best tools from all over the world. Mostly hand forged. We go for
Tools for what? You were going to go somewhere, Kathleen.
Well, for tilling, so instead of using a rototiller, we have broad forks, and those have been around for years. Mm-hmm. And it's it does. You step on it, you pull back, it lifts the soil, it helps your back. So we use for different, and then we can suggest what tool for what type of soil, because we know what it can do, what it can't do, what it's meant for, all those types of things. Mm-hmm. So so we have woodworking tools, we have gardening tools, we have. We have woodlot tools, and we have stone tools, and anything to do on your land, for your land, by hand.
Garden work, forest work.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Your firewood.
Meaning,
your firewood.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Building.
Building
structures.
Mm-hmm.
Road work.
Who?
Stonework.
It's like, this feels in a way like a throwback to the past. On the other hand, Peak Oil might say, this is very forward-looking, mm-hmm. power outages and so on. What led you to do this? Certainly an extension of your own lives, but mm-hmm. you've got to be not the only ones wanting to do this if you're going to have a shop. Who come here? Who shops with you?
Well,
and what do they do?
One of the things in starting the store was that we noticed that Orcas had a high percentage of real estate sellers here all over town. And we wanted to let the people that come through town also know that there's a large alternate community that lives on Orcas.
And the surrounding areas.
Right, and in the surrounding islands and areas here in this archipelago. So that, and when in my travels, if I came into a shop like ours, I would know that there was a large community here to support it. so that you'd know, even though you may not see them in town, you'd know they exist here on the island. So that's one of the reasons that we decided that a storefront, rather than just doing fairs, which we did in the past.
Right, for 2 years we did that.
So that people can actually come in regardless of whether they're from LA, which there's a lot of people from LA, the Bay Area, a lot of urban areas moving up here that are really thrilled at finding alternative ways of doing things.
And we also want to be a place of education, so a place where people can come in and they might not know they're interested in it, or you know, just to pique their interest, to say, oh, okay, that they don't have to do the extreme that we do, but that they can find that gray area. They can do it through paint, non-toxic paint. They can do their insulation in their building with cotton insulation or wool. They can do it in their bedding. They can do it in their clothing. They can do it in all areas. It doesn't have to be completely
Back
our
to the
way.
land, off the grid,
Yeah.
do it all by hand.
But just to start their consciousness and saying, oh, okay, I can do it this way. I can make my contribution today in this manner. Oh, I didn't know that you could get non-toxic paint or non-toxic wood finish. So
I imagine part of what you're doing is just piquing people's curiosity in some sense, to even know that certain things exist.
Yeah.
Hemp clothing.
Yeah.
well, and for us, it's like, you don't have to buy it here. If there's an environmental home center, or if there's some place in your community, do it there, great.
Yeah.
But ask for it. If people started asking for it, we'd have more organic clothing. We'd have more organic farms.
Yeah.
We'd have, you know, if people started saying, no, this is what we want, then the demand would increase.
Of course, since you're in a large tourist area here, you really are broadening the reach of who you're educating. You know, you're getting people in
Absolutely.
LA who
Yeah.
would never think about
Right.
non-toxic paints in
Right.
that toxic city.
Yeah.
But that's a start. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and just to give you an example of a tool, one of our flagship tools, which is the scythe. The scythe for mowing grass, the hand scythe, what the Grim Reaper in the past was always pictured with. It's absolutely the opposite of that. It's not a grim tool at all. It's a really wonderful tool to use. And we are proponents of using the scythe instead of the power scythe, which otherwise is known as the weed eater, which is noisy, smelly, it doesn't start all the time, and
Uses fossil fuels.
It uses fossil
Exactly.
fuels, and we are great advocates, and we sell a lot of scythes
We do.
to all types of people. People that look at it and go, well, I think I'll try that, and they buy them, and they're just enthralled of how easy they are to use. They're not like old-fashioned scythes. They're from Tennessee, the steam bent snathe, which is the wooden part, and then they're hand forged in Austria.
The blades.
Yeah, the blades.
Really?
So they're absolutely beautiful and light and easy to use, and people just after they've used them, they realize, oh, this is the way they used to make them when they really used these tools for mowing.
Because they would make good tools that
Good
really had to
tools, light,
last, that easy to
ergonomically.
sharpen, and so
yeah,
on.
yeah.
Well, and I also feel that if you're using a hand tool or doing anything by hand, that you're putting it in scale. You have to do it in scale. You can't build a house that's 3,000 square foot by hand. You'll be building for a very long time. And if you're doing your garden and you're doing your orchard, and things become in scale.
I like
think
that
that's
point,
important.
Kathleen, because I think that that oil and gas have been all expanders of what the human muscle or the animal muscle could do, and huge extenders. When you think of huge cranes that are able to lift enormously heavier things than we ever could do, even on mechanical means. So
Right.
what you're talking about is a scale that's a sustainable scale here on the planet.
Absolutely.
Those things have boosted food production, have boosted construction, and so on, sort of outside the scale of what the planet can carry. That's a nice perspective. So you're returning to a scale that we could maintain.
Yes.
Right.
And we always say, if what you're doing, in your own life, if everyone was doing that, would that be okay for the world or not? So for us, it's like,
Yeah.
we're doing our part. Now, would the world be better? Absolutely. If everyone did the opposite, what would that look
Yes.
on a larger scale?
Well, you're
So-
you're painting that picture. If every Chinese had an automobile like every American does, which is not to say they're wrong. We need to have fewer.
Right.
We need to be sharing, or we need to be walking and finding ways to let the horses walk the road for,
Yeah.
at some point. Yes?
Yeah.
Well, and I was talking with a friend of mine just earlier about visiting Europe. They are ahead of us in those ways. In other words, concentrating and focusing, populations in village settings, whereas all the agricultural land is still left in production. They have trains and mass transit to and from those areas, but then when you get to those villages, you walk or you use a bicycle.
Yeah.
And within that region, they can supply all their own needs. And we're just seeing that as oil and fossil fuels become more and more precious and scarce, that bioregionalism, in other words, using hand tools, what I call neighborhood supported agriculture, NSA, it's not a good acronym, but instead of CSA, would even be more viable, because then those foods don't have to travel very far at all. You could have 10 neighborhoods together, all with hand tools. I know alone, and with Kathleen's help, we produce probably enough in our garden to probably sustain 10 families.
Truly.
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 We have 9 goats, and goats eat brush and all kinds of material from the garden. And so we just rotate that right through. We use their manure to re-fertilize our garden, and then the refuse from the garden goes right back to them, and any brush and things like that. So right in our own neighborhood, we could probably supply 10 neighbors with enough food for
That's
their...
heartening news, actually.
So it doesn't have to be big. And this is less than a quarter-acre garden.
No.
Yeah.
Really.
And we eat out of our garden year-round.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah.
How do you do it in the winter? What are you eating in the winter?
We're eating
Kales.
Canned foods?
Oh, no.
No.
No. We're
Dried
eating
foods?
live foods.
Live foods. So
foods.
your garden is with you all year.
All year. In fact, I'm planting now, and this is another thing about
So
farming
here we are
and
in,
gardening.
in August, right?
Because
You're
we're
planting
in
now.
August now. I am planting a whole new planting. This is when you plant for your winter garden.
I see.
Okay, things are germinating really quickly. All your kales, chards, carrots, cauliflower, broccoli, potatoes, all those things can be planted now, and you can eat them throughout the winter here on Orcas Island. And
we don't have a greenhouse,
because
so
we don't have a greenhouse, so this is not under glass.
So you're not even doing extensions.
No,
Wow.
this is we're not extending our season. We plant seeds in the ground. We don't raise
Use-
starts and then
right.
transplant them
Yeah.
outside. And we have the most luscious, flourishing garden in the winter. And so it's, and I know Elliot Coleman and some other people have been doing, experiments up in Maine with using, greenhouses and double
it will be
coverings.
different in different areas,
would
of
be.
course,
Right.
because
But
you've got a
here,
mild
yeah,
maritime
that's
climate.
right.
It's going to be
even if
more
it
temperate.
snows here, the kale, the dinosaur kale, just kind of gets a little
It gets sweeter.
Yeah, and then it just brushes it off, and
Away we go.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's wonderful.
So beside the scythe, I want to go back to the tools, because
Right.
I think the tools that you have along the walls of this wonderful space are just fascinating. What other kinds of tools that are people intrigued by? Are they getting that are magical? Whatever.
Well, the Japanese hori-hori,
Yeah.
which is a soil knife, it's for digging, it's for weeding, it's for transplanting, it's for anything and everything. So the hori-hori is probably our number one tool, besides our broad forks and our scythes and what else?
Then if we go to woodworking tools, we're
Yeah.
we're getting into a lot of Japanese saws and chisels that are all hand forged, different than U.S. made ones that are not as well constructed and don't work as well. I mean, the Japanese, our companies are now copying the Japanese, but they're just so easy to use. When people use these chisels, we're building the Stage on the Green, which is a performance shelter here in town, and we showed people how without power tools you could use them to do these huge wooden joints, and they work very effectively and actually do cuts that are impossible with power tools.
With power tools.
Yeah.
Well, that's really nice to hear. There are limits to the power tools.
There are limits to the power
Not
tools.
only that they need to be powered.
Right. And so you have to take a lot more processes, and that's one of the other things about using hand tools. I've been in landscaping, for 30 years or so, and have in the past used tractors and power equipment. But what I find with using power equipment, it's so coarse in what it does. It's not as finely tuned as a hand tool. So what happens is you end up doing a lot of destruction along with the construction. So you have to go back and clean up a lot of things. Tractor work, you have to clean up the lawn that you rode over with your tires, and you made a mistake with the bucket and you ripped up something here and there. So I find that if you take all of that into account, then you really aren't saving yourself a whole lot of time by using power equipment, even though people think they are. And the plus side of that is your body stays in good shape. You get the benefit of movement. Whereas I think a lot of people, with computers and things like that, become more and more sedentary. And hand tools really allow you to move. And I think that's essential for life, is movement. So the more movement I think you do, the better off you are.
And what we also say is a hand tool is the conduit between you and the earth.
Certainly. I mean, there's this wonderful, the thing of craft, I mean, is what you're doing here is furnishing us the tools for good craft, because there's a satisfaction that happens when you're working with a material, be it a plant or wood or a house or stone, of shaping it, creating what you want, having, and there's some patience that comes with that. I mean, you're talking about a different, speaking of Smith and Speed, you're talking about a different speed of living.
Right.
Slow speed.
Yeah.
But I would guess that in our fast speed lives, that many people are living in an industrial society that's going faster and faster every year, that's a welcome bit of, back to the right scale, I would say, the human scale of having our bodies be. Remember that we have bodies and being in them.
You miss a lot also. You miss a lot along the way when you're trying to keep up with the thing with a power tool. Going back to, say, a weed eater, having used weed eaters in the past, you can use a weed eater for about 8 hours during a day, but after that, your body is humming. You can't breathe. You're after breathing in the fumes, which are very toxic, by the way, and the actual exhaust is right there in front of you. Okay. The thing about power tools is your body must adapt to their speed.
Yes.
Rather than the reverse with a hand tool. A hand tool, if properly constructed, is actually adapted to you and your speed. And you're the one who regulates how much you're going to work and how your body is going to move. Whereas with power tools, you have to adapt your body to their rate and rhythm.
Yes.
And it doesn't work many times, So that's a really important thing for me, since I work all the time outside, to not be having, motors and engines and fossil fuel driven machines dictate where my body and how fast it's going. So, and it works.
You have more than tools here, I notice. I mean, there are Japanese hot tubs and clothing and other things. So talk to us about sort of that extension of, as purveyors of tools and other treasures here, what else you have?
Well, we have the Japanese hot water heater, which is what we have in our garden, and it's wood-fired, wood burning.
So you've got a little something or other, a little baby wood stove kind of a thing.
Exactly that.
And it has a liner, and the water is natural convection, so it draws from the bottom and spits out the top, so that you can have a bath. Traditionally, a Japanese bathtub, you can plumb it inside. You would just need to do the chimney out. And so we have that in our garden, and what we do, because we hand water, is once the water's cooled down, then we use that water in our garden.
That's perfect.
Oh, and it's great. We use it year round, and it's
I imagine it's cozy and the nicest thing going.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
I mean, my understanding of the Japanese is that's how they kept warm on those cold nights, is that everybody just gets soaked in the hot tub, get their core of their body warm, and they're warm for the night.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So we have that. We also have, organic clothing, organic bedding, towels, all that good stuff. So am I missing anything?
Well, and in addition to that, wool. We're definitely believers in wool products. Some of the comforters we have here are actually from sheep raised out at the Caulfield's farm.
Here on the island.
And
it's local, yes.
Right, it's a local product. And then we also the structure we're building right now by hand with local lumber, all Orcas grown Doug fir. we're going to be insulating the
With wool.
walls with wool, with just wool from a local sheep farmer.
So you're just taking just the shearings
Just the
and
shearings.
just putting it into the wall, or
Well,
how's
you
that done?
We treat it with borates, a borate solution, just like you use to rinse your eyes out.
Okay.
Well, borate solutions are used to make it so that insects don't want to nest in it.
Right.
And actually wool doesn't need a fire retardant because it won't catch fire.
It just
melts. It doesn't catch
Oh,
on fire.
nice.
So it's really, the other thing is, if people are familiar with the fiberglass insulation they usually use in their house, if you've ever seen wet fiberglass insulation, it turns into a soggy mat that no longer has any insulative qualities.
That's right.
Wool, which is for thousands of years known that it actually keeps its loft even if it gets wet.
That's right.
I mean, that's the whole idea between about having a wool sweater, is that it keeps its loft and
That's right. Every backpacker knows that.
and so
Exactly.
in your house, if you haven't flashed properly or something and it gets wet, you still don't lose that insulative quality. So that's why we're proponents of using products like that. So, and up in Alberta now and in New Zealand, they are creating insulations in 2-inch increments, so you can insulate any cavity, any size cavity you want, with 2-inch thick bats
That's of wool.
of wool.
You must have your finger on some wonderful people and places and so on, producing these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do a lot of research, so we look at different, like England and Germany, and because they are so far ahead of us in the sense of non-toxics. So we're always trying to find new ways, different ways, and they're always coming up with new things. Like there's also some kind of soy insulation that I'm not really quite sure of, but there's something new to do
So
with
things
soy.
are being developing,
So things are developing in our country that that can be used currently.
You mentioned about I wanted to talk about sort of the philosophy behind, the rationale behind this. Besides being an extension of how you live, there's got to be some perspective and educating people. But there's got to be some bigger pictures about the times we are living in, why you're turning to this kind of process and products. I know that you've talked about educating people, the thing about the fish.
Right.
Yeah.
That perspective, what is that?
Right. Well, we feel like obviously if you give something to somebody and they don't learn the process of how it's made, including our children, they become more and more divorced from the actual process of where their food comes from. So we like people to be educated about how to use the hand tools, and then they become involved in the whole process of where their food comes from. Here in Orcas, the organic farmers are attempting to create a relationship with the public school so the children can come out to organic farms and places that grow their own food and supply the kitchen at the local school with fresh foods grown here on Orcas Island, rather than things brought in by a food services truck that has been trucked from thousands of miles away sometimes. Whereas, and that's also a good thing to educate children about, is how we save, how we live within our means as a people, is we bring things in locally, make it here. There's no reason why we can't do things in our own region or on our own island and not have to bring it from thousands of miles away. And Kathleen and I were talking before about the analogy of a person who's got some sort of illness, and they go to the doctor, whether it be a naturopath or a Western doctor, and they say, hey, I'm feeling this, this, and this, but I don't want to change what I eat. I don't want to change what I do every day as far as movement. I sit at a desk or whatever, but can you help me?
Right.
Well, I feel like our nation and the world right now is in the same place. That there are some prudent decisions we'll have to make as far as, do we want to be healthy? So we need to be educated. We need to know where we're going, and if we're not educated, then if we're not willing, we have to be also willing to make some adjustments.
I think you're right, and I think that part of why we started paying attention to peak oil is it struck me is one facet of things, but one that's going to wake up a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right.
Because as those prices rise and it gets more and more expensive to get pineapples flown over from Hawaii and other things, people are going to start to pay attention to, well, and the prices for things that are local, which right now are more expensive because they're created by, the food, produce and so on is more expensive because they are created organically and by hand and so on. At some point, they will become they are the true value now because they're healthier. But the costs will show that to be so.
I totally agree.
And it's going to be very shocking to those people who are still existing in that, really relying on that and not having alternatives or being educated in another way. I think it's going to be a huge deal, it's going to be
big changes.
A big change.
Big changes.
Yeah.
Right. You mean you're not? There's not just a pill that can answer this, right?
Exactly.
No, it's not going to be.
As we don't have enough electricity, and you have to look at cutting back or conserving. And the good news is there's lots that people can do now. We have in America a huge margin of conservation efforts and efficiency efforts and so on for people to change. But you're right; they have to be willing.
And the use of hand tools. You were saying one of our points is for the use of these old hand tools to still be passed down, because quickly the old timers are dying out. The people that know how to use these tools.
Yes.
And if we don't get that knowledge now and have our youngsters and young men, in their 20s and 30s, able to pick up these crafts, like being a blacksmith. We have many blacksmiths here on the island right now.
Really?
Oh, and
Wonderful.
they're very interested in creating tools. They have young kids from one of our schools, Salmonberry, creating tools, and they're only, how old is Taj? He's like
9.
He's 9 years old, and he made his own knife, his own adze.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
So these are things. In the old days, the blacksmiths, and this might be a kind of a funny story, maybe not funny, but strange.
12 seconds. We don't have a long story.
The Indians actually, if they were going to, take a bunch of white settlers, they would kill the rest of the settlers, but they would save the blacksmith because he was considered sort of an alchemist.
Absolutely.
Because he could create all kinds of beautiful things and effective tools. So they saved him, and they actually become part of the tribe.
That's wonderful. May you be saved.
Yeah.
May your tools be saved. Thank you for this. It's been
Thanks very
wonderful,
much.
Errol and Kathleen.
Thank you.
You're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses for a Changing Energy Future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Join us next time.